Now, next up, I'm really excited to introduce a few really, really cool people for you, so you can, and I'm sure you'll learn a bunch. One of them is Mandeep Arora, the former founder and CEO of Cantaloupe, and now a venture partner at the investment firm Nordic Eye. And he's going to be joined on stage by a gentleman by the name of Harpinder Singh, partner at Innovation Endeavors. And I'll let them both take it away. Please give them a huge round of applause. I probably could have timed that better.
Thanks, Manveer. All right, thanks, Manveer and Avid, for arranging this. I'm excited about this conversation. So on my right here, we have Mr. Harpinder Singh, Harpi, who has founded...
Nobody's called me a Mr. in a while.
who has founded and exited 2 really successful companies, and has a really interesting story of how those companies came to be. But before we get into that, I wanted to know a little bit about the audience today. So how many of you are currently starting a company? Wow, all right. How many of you want to start a company but haven't yet? Okay, out of those folks, how many of you know exactly what company you want to start? Okay, so we got a few people still searching, right? All right, great. So Harpi, you got a master's in computer science at the University of Indiana, right? After coming from Chandigarh, and then went to get your MBA at Stanford. You said you dropped out of, you told me you dropped out of your PhD program. You, why did you do that?
So thanks, Mandeep. That's a great note to start on. Why did you drop out? So I had gone to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign to start my PhD, and I really thought when I came from India that I wanted to do a PhD. That's the best thing I could do as somebody who really loved computer science. But sort of in mid-90s, basically if you were a PhD, you could go get an academic job, or you could go work at Microsoft Research, or you could go work at IBM Research. Those were sort of the options. There wasn't like, you know, every hot company in the Valley is hiring PhDs. So I wasn't too excited about being an academic, being in Midwest somewhere, and hanging out with grad students. So I felt that I'd go to corporate, and that'll be more fun. So it was not very deeply thought through.
Maybe you felt a little entrepreneur in your bones, kind of tugging at you.
I always wanted to start something.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
So I had that bug, but I felt that maybe being a PhD would be fun, and then I think just hanging out with the professors and grad students kind of convinced me that I want to really.
How did the parents feel when you dropped out of the PhD program?
I think they were fine. They didn't actually honestly know any better. They were just happy that I had done my master's, so that was awesome. And by that time, they kind of couldn't really tell what I was doing. Yeah. So they were like, okay, you have a job. That sounds kind of cool. Go do it.
Yeah, sounds like your parents are a little more relaxed than mine. I got a big guilt trip when I dropped out to start my first company.
My dad did ask me every day if I was applying for an MBA.
There we go. And then when you were at Stanford, you wanted to start something, but you didn't know what. Is that right?
No, that's correct.
And it's really interesting, you know, when people ask me, hey, I want to start a company, I've got this very strong point of view that you should be obsessed with a problem, you should have some connection to it. A lot of folks in the Valley have this concept of founder market fit, that maybe you grew up anything. We were talking to an entrepreneur just now who's going to present later today, who told me a story about seeing a picture of a child who had been maimed by a mine, and that inspired him years later to start a company to solve that problem. But you wanted to start a company and you didn't have a problem to solve, and you went through a really interesting process to find that company. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We followed a little bit of an unconventional path. So I think many of you will relate to this. I was at Oracle, and my green card was stuck forever. So I figured, okay, I could be a developer and continue to sort of, wait my time out. But I was able to go to Stanford get an MBA in parallel while Oracle put me on a leave of absence. So for all purposes, my green card continued, which kind of let me go learn something new. And at Stanford, I was able to work on different ideas because I really was kind of intrigued by the idea of graduating and starting something. And through that process, I met a couple of other people who were working on their own ideas. And we ended up pitching each other and so on. But ultimately, we were working on an idea in storage, infrastructure, and 3 weeks before we were going to graduate, we realized that we were too late to the market, so we ended up killing the idea. And guess what? We didn't have jobs. We had not cared to kind of interview, so it was too late to get a job anyway. So we decided we were going to commit to each other. So 4 of us, we decided we will spend 6 months together and see if we could come up with an idea that we'd be excited by. So we dove into multiple spaces. I'm happy to talk about that process, and just went through a little bit of a random walk, and then came up with a process on how to kind of search for an idea. So essentially, we were a team before an idea that wanted to work together, and ended up coming up with multiple ideas that we were excited by, and started something. And then I was basically a founder after that for about 18 years. So I worked with the same founding team, and we started 2 companies together.
That's amazing. I want to come back to how you kept that team together, which can be a challenge. But let's go back. So you guys want to start something together, but you got a blank sheet of paper. You got the entire world, every sector, every industry. That can be intimidating for people. So how did you, from a blank sheet of paper, figure out what actions to take as a group?
Yeah. So like I said, I think there was a lot of random walk in that. Frankly, we started out. There was not like a playbook that we could follow. There is one now, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But we started out by doing what you're doing. We went to events like this. We tried to meet a lot of PhDs. We tried to meet academics, professors, and so on. And we thought we would really meet like this, brilliant PhD who needed a business team. And what we realized is around here, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, why? Yeah,
there's too
a
many.
lot of people recommend that. You're a business guy, you don't know the tech, go find a PhD. Why doesn't that work?
Because all the VCs that Manveer put on the list here, they're already wining and dining those PhDs and professors. So they're all hooked massively. So they are set. So after basically doing some of those things, we realized that, okay, that's not a path that's going to work out. We really got to find our own idea. So that's when we went down this journey of, okay, let's pick a few spaces. And we only wanted to do infrastructure. We only wanted to do B2B. So we picked a few spaces. Wireless was emerging. Fiber optics was going to be big. Storage was exploding. So we picked 4 ideas. There were 4 of us. And we all picked an idea each. We were going to go deep. And we came up with this structured process of generating ideas, evaluating them, ranking them, debating with each other, giving each other feedback, and basically maintained a stacked ranked list of ideas, and gave ourselves a timeline. After 4 months, we were going to be down to 3 ideas, and after 5 months, we were going to be down to 2 ideas, and on January 4th of 2000, we were going to do, or 2001, we were going to do this go, no-go, and make this decision. So all this is in a case called Project Shed, that is taught at Stanford Business School. So if you want to look it up. So our team was called Shed, Scott, Harpi, Eric, David.
That was the 4 co-founders.
Yeah, those were 4 of us. We were not marketing people, so we just used the name Project Shed, and it kind of stuck. So that's the case study. But that kind of details out sort of this process, which I described in summary. And at the end of it, we picked an idea, rallied around it, and I think we were fortunate that we picked an idea in a big space with strong tailwinds. And we were able to build a very interesting company.
That's awesome. So I read the case this afternoon to refresh my memory. I'd read it before. You assigned each other an industry each, or a sub-industry. How did you each approach building expertise within those industries, and how did you spot pain points within those industries to put onto your stacked ranked list?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of this sort of just coming up to speed. we had been in business school for 2 years. So I was a software developer, but I felt like I wasn't sort of exactly in touch to have that level of insight, to have that unique sort of idea. So we spent about 2 weeks or so just doing, secondary research, making sure we were up to speed and so on. And I remember we had an advisor, Gart Saloner, who was the dean of Stanford Business School. He told us, guys, you gotta get out of the office. You gotta stop riding the desk. And that's what really paid off. So we spent a lot of time meeting engineers, meeting product people. We gave ourselves goals around, hey, we're gonna attend X number of conferences per month. We're gonna go have these many conversations. And what we realized was talking to marketing people, talking to CEOs and all was a waste of time. We really made progress when we met engineers, when we talked to product people and asked them what they were excited about, what problems they were anticipating. And through that process, we started sort of understanding what are the second order problems that these people are noticing once you sort of scratch beneath the surface. And that's what ultimately led us to our idea. I'm happy to talk about that more.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, when I was rereading Project Shed today, Harpi and I spoke earlier this week, and I said, wow, his process was so different than mine. Because I grew up in an industry and I knew about a problem. But actually, when I read the case, I was like, oh, actually, it's not that different from what we did, because my co-founder and I spent 9 months driving around the country, meeting people in that industry to understand. We had some direction on the problem. We were totally wrong on the solution. And we spent 9 months getting out there and interviewing whoever would talk to us from any angle to understand that problem, why it hadn't been solved, why people tried to do it. So I'd love to see that connection there of just get out there, speak to your potential customers or even their partners or customers of their customers, just understand all the angles. So I think that's a really good takeaway. So you're all brilliant guys. You're at Stanford, you've got your industries. You talked about the stacked ranked list. How did you handle the arguments and the debates of which one rose to the top?
So I think one of the things we did early on was we agreed on what type of company we wanted to create. As you can imagine, this is a very sort of amorphous process, right? You have a team, but not exactly an idea. So we agreed on certain sort of framework around what would that company look like, what would the culture be, and what would the company do. And by that, I mean, we actually came up with what we call this sort of attribute list. So they were like, I think 12 or 13 things on it. Around, it had to be IP heavy, we had to be able to see barriers to entry, we wanted something that was data heavy, and so on. We wanted to create a business that could reach $50 million of revenues in 5 years. So there was a list. And we would rank all of our ideas. We did what we called a partner meeting every Friday. So we would rank all our ideas against that list every week. And we would look at, okay, this one is scoring a 35, this one is scoring a 42, why? And okay, this one is, scoring poorer on a couple of these attributes, which created like really the work stream for next week. Mm-hmm. This is scoring low on X, Y, Z. Let's go see if we can improve that, or maybe we gotta kill it. So honestly, it wasn't like one conversation that, okay, this is what is rising to the top. It was a 4-month conversation.
Yeah.
And the ideas moved up and down every week, but it became clear over time.
Yeah.
What was going to work.
I love that. So you had a really disciplined matrix that you all agreed on and understood how to score things. I think that's great. I think we can all get lazy at times and fall into emotional debates, but when you really agree on a framework and a scoring system, it can enforce a lot of discipline and rigor to a process and make things really clear.
Honestly, the number one mistake I've seen people make when they're incubating ideas is they go from sort of one idea to the next, and many times these are disconnected. Right? I worked with many, many founders on incubating companies, and I've worked with a number of my students from Stanford now to help them go through this process. And what happens is, okay, you're working on an idea in infrastructure, next day you get excited about an idea in I don't know, AI for this and that, and the third day you're interested in an idea in, I don't know, photography or whatever. By fifth idea, you're fatigued. And it's 4 months later and people think like, okay, maybe I'm not meant for this. So I think my number one kind of takeaway from our process and seeing many people who've gone through it is if you can commit to certain spaces, then you have these compounded learnings. And you get clarity around what type of company you're trying to create. Just increases your chances of success.
So you guys investigated multiple ideas, but there was linkages between them because you were somewhat focused, so those learnings could compound.
Absolutely. I mean, basically, I think we became smarter than many insiders by like month 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Which is what you need to kind of have that level of insight to see that white space to create a company.
Well, it's almost like a superpower. When you have the free time and everybody in industry is busy doing their day jobs and you get to sit on the sidelines and interview people and get all the perspectives, they don't have the time to go do that. But you have the time and headspace to do that, right?
Yeah. And knowing that, okay, if this doesn't work out, then basically you're going to have to go get a job, which can be a big motivator.
That's right. You didn't want to go back to Oracle.
No, I didn't. I was not going to do that.
So the first company you found was called Fiber Tower, right? And you guys, I didn't quite understand it, but it sounded like you convinced a bunch of larger industry players to kind of, today the term is a federated network, almost like a federated network of their towers to enable cellular backhaul. So you're 4 graduates from Stanford. I mean, that gives you some credibility, but still, you guys you could set a company on paper. How did you convince these big corporates to let you tap into their infrastructure and build something overlaying on top of theirs and their competitors?
So we were fundraising for the first company in 2001. So it was a really bad time. I mean, dot-com bubble had burst. Basically, all the VCs said no. And I remember this conversation with Andy Reckleff, who was at Benchmark. He said, okay, he was an investor in NorthPoint, which was a DSL company, which had just gone bankrupt. He's like, okay, this is a really good idea, but if I fund you guys, my partner should fire me. So people did not have the appetite for capital-intensive businesses. They definitely did not have appetite for telecom. So we ended up raising our first money from one of the tower companies, SpectraSite, which was one of the top 3 tower companies. And you're right. I mean, the number one question we were getting is, why you? The idea makes sense, but guys, none of you are from wireless. Why you? So we got a lot of rejections, but this was a company founded by an entrepreneur like us, so he was willing to back us, which kind of got the domino going, and then actually ended up with all the 3 tower companies as investors in us.
Wow.
With their 3 CEOs on our board, and had all the, bigger VCs kind of ultimately fund the company over time. So we ended up raising a lot of money, $200+ million in that one, but kind of did it in the opposite order, where instead of financials first and strategics later, it was inverted.
That's a topic for another day. That sounds like a complicated set of relations to manage.
It was.
How many VCs did you pitch before you said, okay, let's go to the strategics, this isn't working?
I don't remember the number, but it was a capital-intensive project, and there were not a lot of VCs that made sense to even pitch at that time.
Yeah, I was raising around the same time, maybe a year later, and it was a brutal time, and we were making hardware. Nobody was interested in hardware. Isn't a downturn a terrible time to start a company?
So I started both my companies in a downturn. So the first one around that time, and second one in 2009-10. So after like the 2008 crisis. Certain things are harder and certain things are easier. Recruiting was easier in a sense that people who were looking for jobs in a startup really meant it. They weren't doing it because their friends were doing it. I think that became easier. I think second time around, the funding became easier. I think the noise in the system kind of clears up a little bit in a downturn. So yeah, there are pros and cons, but I am really glad we started in a downturn.
Yeah, I didn't mean the question. I was just prompting you. I also found that being an entrepreneur in a downturn can be surprisingly, it's tough. You don't get as much money as freely, but it avoids some of the hype cycles, and talent is easier to tap into. In the second company, So in the first company, you were VP of product. In the second company, you became the CEO. Actually, before I ask that question, 4 co-founders, and that's a tough journey. I imagine there's times where you loved each other, and there's times where maybe you thought one had to go, but you guys made it, and you came together a second time. Do you have any tips, any secrets to share from keeping that together for so many years, for over a decade?
Honestly, I don't have any great wisdom on that, other than the fact that I think it's not unlike personal relationships. If you put in the thought and time to think about what would the journey look like, who do I want to be with, and you're aligned on values and so on, then the rest of stuff works out. And partly because of the way we were kind of born. It was born out of, the what of what we were trying to create, and the how of, how would we get there, what would be the process, what would the culture look like, and so on. We frankly had plenty of disagreements, but we really kind of were fond of each other. Mm-hmm. And there's this one thing we did during our ideation process and also in both our companies, this thing called feedback. And I'm happy to talk about that. It's a little bit of a longer conversation, but this is something we learned at Stanford around having very open conversation with people you work with around, hey, what are you doing that's making you effective with me, and what are you doing that's making you less effective with me? So give me 3 pluses and minuses, and that just really clears up the air. And that, okay, we're all working towards the same goal, and it just gets rid of ego, politics, all of that. So I think it just created great hygiene. We were able to create a very good culture. I think people really enjoyed being at these companies, which ultimately led to a durable relationship between the founders.
Amazing. It sounds like you guys had a base foundation of trust and care and honesty.
Absolutely. In fact, my co-founder Scott and I did most of the fundraising, and you raised money. We negotiated terms in the agreement, financial terms in all our funding agreements, without necessarily having the other founders on board, because we just knew that if it's good for me, it's good for everybody else as well, and there was that level of trust.
Yeah. Given the number of aspiring entrepreneurs and maybe just starting off who may have co-founders, can you talk about how you guys handled the equity discussion, which can be very tricky for co-founding teams?
Equal.
Kept it simple.
Kept it simple. We split it 4 ways. Everybody got paid the same.
Yep.
Which I thought was very generous, because my two of the 4 co-founders, they were a lot more experienced. One guy had actually started 2 public companies before. Another of my co-founders, he was a VP Eng type at Quantum, a large storage company, and then there was Dave and I, so the H&D. We were kind of like 4 years out of undergrad or grad school when we were at GSB. So I think these guys were incredibly generous to kind of say, okay, if the company does well, then whether you own 5 percentage points more or less doesn't matter. Yep. So let's just do it equally. And I think that again contributed to the tone and the trust.
Yeah, keeping things equally keeps it very simple. It may not be the right solution for every team, but I remember my co-founder was leading sales, and 10 years into our journey, he was heading sales, and the board offered him a commission program. And it's not uncommon for the head of sales to earn more than the CEO. And he was fantastic at his job. So I said, yeah, go for it. And he got up in front of the board and he refused. He said, Mandeep and I have been equal since the day we started, and we're keeping it that way. And I said, come on, man, it's been 10 years, go for it. He said, nope. Yeah. And he refused.
And for those of you who've been working on your idea for 10 months, you brought it to a certain point, you put in your own, sweat equity into it. Equal may not be the right answer.
Yeah.
But I think in our case, where we were just starting from a plain sheet.
Together at the same moment.
Yeah.
So in the second company, you took on the role of CEO.
Not from the beginning.
Not from the beginning.
Yeah.
So talk about
switched.
that transition, how you guys made that decision, but more importantly, even though you'd been on the leadership team and the core co-founding group, I imagine being in that seat was different. What was the difference?
I thought it wouldn't be different. So my co-founder's son, he got really sick. So he's like, okay. So I get a call one evening from Scott, who was the CEO, and he's like, okay, this is going to take a while. I don't think I can be in the office every day. You should take on the CEO role. So I wasn't necessarily looking for it. I wasn't pitching for it. But I was happy to do it. And we made a lot of decisions together as a team, but still the CEO role felt very different.
Why?
It just like ultimately the buck stops there. You're accountable. It's a little bit more lonely. I was heading product, so that really gave me a lot of energy to work with my team to solve these problems and to hit this date when we were shipping and talk to customers and so on. And the CEO kind of just puts you in a different zone, and now you're like doing budgets and forecast versus actuals and so on. So it was different, but I really kind of enjoyed it.
You got a little bit, I imagine, a little bit less of the dopamine hits you get from shipping product.
This was fun too.
Yeah.
This was fun too. It was just different, and I thought it would not feel that different, but it was.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then after that company, you transitioned into venture capital and you joined Eric Schmidt at Innovation Endeavors. He backed your second company as well. Is that right? Is that how you guys?
Yeah,
met?
he backed my second company.
Yeah.
I actually went to, after I transitioned out of Rakuten, which acquired my second company, I actually went to teach at Stanford GSB.
Yep.
And then I ended up joining Innovation Endeavors.
And so at GSB and at Innovation, both, you're teaching entrepreneurs this framework and this process you went through. Is that right?
At GSB, we teach it as a part of a couple of classes.
Yeah.
And at Innovation Endeavors, we act like a normal VC firm, but we also tend to incubate
Yep.
high-quality teams that want to start a company. So we go through this process. We call it now research-driven ideation, RDI. So we basically spend like 6 to 8 months working with founders to kind of find an idea.
Are there any, you talked about the process, are there any things you look for when identifying people who you want to spend time with in that process?
Yeah, that's what you're betting on. Ideally, we are trying to find people, we're trying to find teams that have good, like, obviously technical skills, but also GTM instincts. It doesn't mean that we are looking for a business person, but we're just looking for, hey, can this team be commercial? Are they going to be customer centric?
Yeah.
I mean, are they going to just sit here and write code all day, or are they going to actually go out and try to understand the problem and sort of figure out what would that idea be? I think that's the number one thing. Second, we're just looking for intensity and speed of iteration. I think if you can get those two things right, I think the ideas normally follow.
Like you're a big believer the speed of iteration is a really key differentiator for startups, and that right now it's a really great time to tap into that. Can you talk about that a little more?
I think honestly that is the only advantage that startups have over bigger companies. As startups, you can get away with stuff that you would not get away as a bigger company, in quality, in regulatory, and so on. So you can just take more risks. But if you're going to act like, I'm a PhD student and I've got 6 years to think about it, then obviously the incumbent is going to catch up.
Yep. Yep. And then for the folks that already have their idea, you fund seed and Series A companies. When you're sitting down to hear a pitch for the first time, what are the 3 key things you're really looking for and focused on, even before they start speaking, that you can't wait to see in their presentation?
I think, again, people have probably heard a similar answer before, but number 1 is team. Second is space, and is there a good why now? Are there tailwinds? Is there a regulatory change? Is there a technology change? Like, why now? And third, does the team have a unique insight around, either the product or go-to-market? How are they going to sort of build this wedge? How are they going to go outpace everybody else?
What about red flags?
Red flags are usually if the team is not properly balanced. And that's OK. I mean, in fact, most of the founders we are funding are only technical teams. But many times you find that, OK, the red flag would be, OK, the team is just so inward-looking. That could be a red flag. Or the team is in it for a quick buck. I want to flip it back to whoever. and so on. So it's pretty obvious
Yeah.
when you meet a team if there's a red flag.
Yeah.
It can take longer to know if it's the right team or not, but if it's a red flag, you can usually find it sooner.
Okay, changing gears, since this event is hosted by the Indian Tech Network and the Sikh Foundation, I wanted to ask you about the influence of Sikhism and being an immigrant. What has that had on your career as an entrepreneur and your approach to business?
So I think many, or if most of the people here are probably immigrants. So I think we're all like, I think we all self-selected to kind of uproot ourselves and come here, which I think is a great qualifier to be a founder. So you've already sort of taken that risk. I think on the point about Sikhism, I personally drew a lot of strength from these stories of being underdogs and being the challenger. And there's plenty of those. I mean, that's why there's so many Sikhs in Indian Army. And they're warriors and great professionals and so on. So I took a lot of just strength from those. I think Sikhism talks about this concept of Chardi Kala, which means eternal optimism. So you need a lot of that. As a founder, it talks about, not riding the highs too high or the lows too low, which I think is, again, a great sort of thing to have as a founder. So I think those things kind of were great to give me perspective and to sort of avoid the stresses, or at least manage the stresses of the startup, and still be optimistic.
Can't fully avoid it.
Yeah,
You
can't
gotta-
avoid it, but
manage
you can be
it.
optimistic
Well,
about it.
that's amazing. I had never thought about that, but that being raised with that spirit of being the underdog and making it is
Yeah,
is
why
a
would I go
powerful
work for somebody
feeling.
else when I could do it for myself?
That's right.
So.
That's right. All right. Well, we wanted to turn it over to the audience. If you've got questions for Harpi here. Yeah. Manveer, do you have a mic? It's coming.
Great job, you're doing a great job. Yeah. When you did, probably Crown was a big tower company, because I was in the same industry there, built all kinds of network operation centers and
Yeah.
all infrastructure myself, ran a company. So what was your company compared to Crown before, after? I don't know the time of when you did, and what kind of competition was there? Or not publicly known competition, but other companies were doing same thing.
Yeah.
Please help us.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of insider knowledge for those who are not from this space. So Crown Castle was actually the largest investor in us. Yeah, over time. But when we were talking to them, they had a competing initiative. So for a year and a half, they actually wanted us to merge into that initiative. They're like, okay, exactly what you said. You're four guys, you know nothing about wireless. We've got this thing going on. We've already put in $10 million into these guys. You should join them. So obviously, we didn't want to do that. And over about a year and a half or so, their initiative fizzled out. And they ended up investing in us. And they invested in us, I think, 2 or 3 times. Ted Miller, who was their CEO, who you may have worked with, had originally made the investment. He was on our board. And then John Kelly joined our board. So yeah, long history with Crown Castle, but these guys were very helpful.
Yeah, hi. I'm an engineer turned entrepreneur, and I wanted to ask you why engineers for market research? Because what I'm noticing, again, is I'm trying to recover and understand the bigger picture. And I started bottoms up, but I'm realizing that you also have to understand the gaps in the market to build a solution. So I was intrigued when you said that when you did market research, going to and talking to the engineers was potentially insightful.
Because look, I mean, if you talk to marketers and so on, you're going to get all this like glossy language, right? Which is not going to give you any insight. So what we realized was we needed to find a way for people to tell us what they think the problems would be. So the best question that we came up with was we would go and ask people, hey, if what you're doing today is successful, what problems does it create 24 to 36 months out? And that's sort of a bounded question. People can look ahead about 2 years and say, okay, this is what I'm going to need. So the application of that is we were literally at a fiber optics conference in Denver. We went to a Nortel booth, talked to an engineer who was demoing all this wireless data gear, and we asked him, okay, you guys are installing all this gear, what problems is it going to create? And literally, the guy sort of verbatim gave us a problem statement. He's like, I think there's not going to be enough backhaul. At these cell sites, it's expensive, it's unreliable, it's not scalable. These sites are going to need, tens, if not hundreds of megabits of data, which didn't exist. I mean, these sites had like anywhere from 1.5 to 6 meg, like what were called T1s. So it literally gave us the problem statement. So when you're talking to engineers, when you're talking to product people, we felt that you could have this type of a conversation. When you're talking to marketers, they're just not deep enough.
Hey, folks, if you can keep the side conversations a little more quiet, please, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Any other questions? Don't all ask at once.
Hi. My question is around the question that you mentioned about equity split, and it was a very simple solution for you to split it equally, but it is not usually the same for most entrepreneurs. So now that you are more on an investor side of it, how do you see cap table as one of the components of where you want to invest in? And what is a red flag when you look at a cap table?
Yes, so I mean, we are usually very respectful of whatever equity arrangement the founders have between them, right? I mean, it's their choice. The time we are curious is if a founder has 1/10 of another founder. There are some situations like that I've seen, and we just want to talk about it. Because it could, I think one thing we've learned is different founders will shine at different stages of the company. Somebody may be really good at ideation, somebody may be really good at prototyping, but somebody may be really awesome at like creating a process and scaling the company and so on. So if the inequity is that much, then I think it could lead people to be unhappy over time. So that's what we want to understand, that, okay, is it durable? Why did you come up with it, and so on. But for most parts, I think people do the reasonable stuff. And if somebody owns 20% and the next guy owns 35%, that's okay. I mean, people do it all the time.
You mentioned the matrix that you use in evaluating ideas. Can you tell us more about the matrix? What were the key variables? And
yeah, I'm happy to share it with you. So if you want to shoot me an email, harpi@innovationendeavors.com or harpi.singh@stanford.edu. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll send you a copy of it. But it basically had, I think, 3 components. I think one was business attributes. I mentioned revenue, barriers to entry, IP. Second was lifestyle. It was things like, hey, is this something we could build out of West Coast? Could one of the 4 of us be the CEO? I also remember there was this thing called the Proud Mom Test. One of my founders was like really fired up about starting this company in the bail bond space. If you guys know what bail bonds are, very fragmented, but like a huge space. And we're like, okay, we're not doing bail bonds, Scott, because it wouldn't pass the Proud Mom Test. I couldn't tell my mom that I'm working on bail bonds. So that was the second, and I forget what the third was, but there was basically 3 buckets. And we had like, maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 attributes under each one of them. But again, that was our rubric. Yours may be different, but I think it was useful to have one.
So I have a question. Being a startup is become quite a fashion these days. Everybody wants to have a startup. As an investor, what kind of startup will interest you?
I think.
Which vertical?
I think it's less about the vertical. I think you can innovate in any vertical. I think we're really looking for high-quality founders with a certain drive, with some unique insights and a technical advantage. So we've invested in verticals all the way from supply chain and containers to grocery to cutting edge, Kafka and AI systems and so on. So I wouldn't point you to a specific vertical. That's not the solution. I think it's really this combination of team, big market, unique insights, some technical defensibility. Does it make sense, or did you have something else in mind?
Kind of, like wind blows, healthcare is the vertical one should go in. Now AI has come in, so that is changing the scenario. So I think many people have a confusion like which field to pick. I see generally when I talk to youngsters, they have a confusion about like which vertical to go in.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you can. You ultimately have to anchor on something. In our case, it was infrastructure, it was B2B. We were somewhat agnostic about whether it's wireless or fiber or whatever. In your case, it could be different, but it has to be sort of tied into something in your background, something that you're excited about.
We'll do maybe one or two more, and then move on to the next part of the agenda.
Thank you. Hey, Harpi. I want to understand investor sentiment around misses. It could be missing a particular trend, or it could be missing a particular company. And the reason why I ask this is because we see as founders there is some bit of herd mentality as well. If we get one term sheet, which is very difficult, but if we get one, in no time, in all likelihood, it would become 5, right? So there is some kind of FOMO that I'm sure investors would go through. So I want to understand investor sentiment around missing a company or a trend.
So look, I think evaluating startups is, by its definition, kind of a murky process, right? You're making decisions with very, very little information, right? When you're evaluating a company at a seed stage, you have a team, you have a deck. So VCs are looking for validation whatever way you can find it. And you're exactly right. When somebody steps up, some VC steps up, that people think of as validation, and then FOMO kicks in, and you get more term sheets and so on. But that's where it's coming from. They're looking for validation, and we all have our misses. There's sort of this big anti-portfolio that we all have that we can talk about. Like, for example, like way back when, I committed to put a check into Meesho, the Indian e-commerce player, as in the first round, which I didn't. It didn't happen. But God, I didn't know what Meesho was going to become. And I have other stories like that, but we all have those.
And that's why they're investing in every company here today. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, create an index fund of plug-and-play companies.
It has to be a good question. You like the last one.
Okay, I'll try.
All right.
Thanks, Mandeep and Harpinder for this presentation and whatnot. I also grew up in Chandigarh, just like you, Sector 9.
All right.
I'm a recent grad from a college. I started working out in the field. I'm an electrical engineer myself. Is there sort of a roadmap to becoming just an investor instead of an entrepreneur? Is there like a sort of like a roadmap that I can sort of look? Because I want to be on that shoes and be an investor. I don't know how many years down the road. I don't know, but I'm just thinking about it. First time at this event. Thanks for organizing this. So just want to know your thoughts on it.
There's no roadmap. There are a few archetypes that I can talk about. There's no roadmap. I can tell you being an investor is a hell of a lot more glamorous, but being a founder is a lot more fun. So don't be in a rush to be an investor. And I think I've seen people who've come from product, who've come from founder backgrounds, people who've just sort of joined as an associate and grow up to become amazing VCs. Mike Moritz was a journalist. So it's amazing to me. Like, I've seen so many different archetypes kind of succeed in this. But there is not a script. I think if you're an operator, if you are really keen on becoming an investor, I think the best thing you can do is build a little bit of a portfolio of your own. Do some angel investing to demonstrate that you can get into good deals, you have some insights, founders like you, and so on. That'll also give you a taste of whether you like it. And then you'll be more attractive to these firms because you're not doing it for the first time then.
But be careful with those check sizes. You can't drain your whole balance sheet on 5 angel deals.
Yeah.
In angel, you need like 50, to try to get a win. So just be mindful.
Any closing thoughts from you, gentlemen, before we move on to some pitches?
No, I'm happy to hang around and chat with people, but yeah, really fun. I mean, I sat in sessions like this for a few years, just sort of soul searching and wanting to start a company and not knowing like how to go from A to B. So I'm happy to kind of share how I connected the dots for myself.
So takeaways: being a founder is more fun. VC is more glamorous. Don't be blown by the winds of change or what's in fashion. Get anchored to something. Find your reason to be anchored for it, because the investors can tell when you sit down with them.
And listen to your family.
There we go.
They can usually
Proud mom index.
Thank you, guys.